The air in courtroom 7B was a carefully curated weapon. It smelled of old paper, polished mahogany, and the faint acidic tang of human anxiety. The incessant, low hum of the fluorescent lights was designed to fray nerves, to grind down resolve until only the hard, unvarnished truth remained, or at least a version of it that could be processed and filed away. Anaya Sharma sat on the hard wooden bench, a small, still point in the swirling currents of the room. She was juror number 17. To the casual observer, she was utterly unremarkable, a deliberate study in beige and grey. Her trousers were simple, her blouse was functional, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe no-nonsense bun. A worn cloth tote bag rested at her feet, containing a water bottle. She looked like a librarian, or a data entry clerk, or one of the countless anonymous faces that populated the city's sprawling, working-class suburbs. This appearance was not an accident. It was armor. While the other potential jurors fidgeted, coughed, and cast nervous glances at the empty judge's bench, Anaya was a statue of composure. Her posture was perfect. Her breathing was slow and even, a measured, meditative rhythm. Her dark eyes, however, missed nothing. She catalogued the wear on the prosecutor's shoes, the nervous tick in the defense attorney's jaw, the way the court stenographer's fingers hovered over her machine. Her gaze was analytical, her mind a silent, whirring engine of observation, sorting and filing every detail. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a percussive slam. Karen Pierce did not walk into a room. She conquered it. She was a tempest in a tailored Armani suit, the color of shark skin, its sharp lines a declaration of intent. Her heels clicked on the polished linoleum with the sharp, distinct report of sniper fire. A wave of expensive, aggressive perfume washed over the first few rows, a chemical assertion of dominance. She was senior counsel for Global Consolidated Holdings, and she carried herself not like a lawyer, but like an empress visiting a distant, squalid province. Her eyes, the color of ice chips, swept across the jury pool. It was not a glance of assessment, it was a glance of dismissal. Her lips, painted a slash of blood red, curled into a subtle, almost imperceptible sneer. These people, her expression screamed. These simple, common people would presume to pass judgment on the complex machinations of her world. The thought was an insult. Her gaze snagged on Anaya Sharma for a fraction of a second longer than the others. She saw the plain clothes, the dark skin, the address on the juror form that corresponded to a neighborhood she only flew over on her way to the Hamptons. A quick, ugly calculation formed in her mind. Biased, hostile. A problem to be eliminated, she made a small, sharp note on the leather-bound portfolio her assistant had handed her. The plaintiff was a man named Miguel Vargas, a former factory foreman for a GCH subsidiary. He sat beside his public defender, a rumpled man whose suit seemed a size too big, looking small and broken. Mr. Vargas had lost 2 fingers in a press machine and was suing for wrongful termination after the company let him go for a pre-existing medical condition he had failed to disclose, a technicality designed to shield them from a much larger workers' compensation payout. It was a classic corporate crush play. Karen Pierce had orchestrated 100 of them. Judge Wallace entered, a man whose weary face seemed carved from granite, and the proceedings began. Voir dire, the sifting of the wheat from the chaff. For Karen, it was a blood sport. She rose to her feet, a predator sensing the weakness in the herd. "Good morning," she said, her voice a smooth, condescending balm that failed to conceal the steel beneath. She prowled before the jury box. Her questions, not inquiries, but carefully aimed provocations. She asked a man in a union T-shirt if he believed all corporations were inherently evil. She asked a young mother if her emotional nature would prevent her from looking at facts objectively. Then she stopped directly in front of Anaya. "You're number 17, she began, the title dripping with disdain. "Shawarma. Is that right?" Anaya met her gaze, her own expression unreadable. Yes, her voice was calm, clear, and devoid of the nervousness Karen expected. "It says here you live on Elm Street in the South Borough," Karen continued, making the address sound like a criminal conviction. "That is correct," Anaya replied. "And what is it you do for a living, Mistress Sharma?" "I am currently between positions," Anaya said, using the carefully rehearsed, technically true phrase. A murmur of satisfaction went through Karen's mind. Unemployed, perfect. "I see," Karen purred. "So you have a lot of time on your hands. Time to read the news, perhaps, form opinions about large, successful companies that are the backbone of this city's economy." It was a trap, and a clumsy one. Anaya did not flinch. "I form opinions based on evidence presented to me." The answer was too perfect, too composed. It infuriated Karen. This nobody, this woman in a cheap blouse, was refusing to play her assigned role as the intimidated prole. "Your Honor," Karen announced, turning to the judge with a flourish. "The defense moves to strike juror number 17 for cause." A ripple of surprise went through the courtroom. Striking for cause was a serious move, usually reserved for jurors who admitted an inability to be impartial. Judge Wallace sighed. The sound of a man who just wanted to get to lunch. "On what grounds, Counselor?" "On the grounds of implicit bias, Your Honor," Karen declared, her voice ringing with false sincerity. "This juror's socio-economic status and place of residence give her a natural and understandable animosity towards a defendant like my client. Global Consolidated Holdings, she cannot be impartial. It is a matter of common sense." The public defender for Mr. Vargas shot to his feet. "Objection. Counsel is profiling the juror based on her address." "Sit down, Mr. Henderson," the judge grumbled. "Mistress Pierce, this is a thin argument." But Karen knew her man. Judge Wallace was an institutionalist. He prized efficiency over fairness, and a prolonged fight over a single juror was inefficient. She pressed her advantage. Inside Anaya's mind, a switch was flipped. The hum of the courtroom, the scent of old wood, the cold pressure of the bench against her back, it all faded into a crystal and sharp-edged focus. The initial injustice had occurred. The game had begun. A cold, hard knot didn't form in her stomach. Instead, a familiar fire kindled in her chest. A righteous, controlled burn she had learned to harness long ago. It was the same fire she'd felt as a child, watching her father, a brilliant engineer with a thick accent, get passed over for promotions he deserved. It was the same fire that fueled her through sleepless nights in business school, and again when she built her first company from nothing, using the condescension of her doubters as fuel. She had built an empire on the bedrock of being underestimated, and Karen Pierce had just handed her a gilded invitation to do it again. The judge called a 15-minute recess before ruling on the motion. Anaya stood, retrieved her tote bag, and walked with measured steps to the public corridor outside the courtroom. She ignored the stares, the whispers, the overt sympathy from some of the other jurors. She found a quiet alcove near the water fountains, pulled out her simple, nondescript smartphone, and dialed a single number from memory. It was answered on the first ring. "David," she said, her voice low. "I've been watching the live feed from the courthouse," a man's voice replied, tight with concern. David Chen, her chief of staff, her loyal right hand. "Anaya, this is insane. I can have the GCH General Counsel there in 10 minutes to have this woman fired on the spot. We can crush this entire case from the outside." Anaya watched a janitor mop the floor, his movements slow and methodical, and felt a kinship with him. "No, David." she said softly. "This isn't about the case anymore. This is about the rot. You can't just cut off the dead branches. You have to dig out the roots." "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice laced with anxiety. "Are you sure you want to do this? In public? Some lessons need an audience," Anaya replied, her resolve hardening into diamond. "She didn't just insult me, David. She insulted the very idea that justice is accessible to everyone, regardless of their station. She used the company's name and power to do it." A calm resolve settled over her, cool and clear. "The system must correct itself," she said, more to herself than to him, from the inside. She ended the call before he could protest further, and took a long, slow sip of water from her bottle. Meanwhile, Karen Pierce was holding court in the same hallway, her voice loud and brash, ensuring everyone could hear her victory lap.
"It's a joke,"
she laughed to a junior associate who scurried in her wake. "They pull these people in off the street, people who have a chip on their shoulder the size of a Buick, and expect them to be impartial about a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Please." She took a sip from a ridiculously small bottle of sparkling water, her pinky finger extended. "The little brown girl in the cheap shoes was the worst of them," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, but still audible, whisper. "Did you see her face? Not a flicker. Those are the dangerous ones, full of resentment." Her associate, a young man with terrified eyes, just nodded mutely. Karen's arrogance was a tangible thing, a force field that warped the space around her. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that she was smarter, better, and more entitled to victory than anyone else in this building. This belief had served her well for 20 years. Today, it would be her undoing. When the recess ended, they filed back into the courtroom. The air was thick with anticipation. Judge Wallace looked down from his perch, his expression one of profound irritation. "On the matter of the defense's motion to strike Juror 17, he began, his voice a low rumble. "While I find counsel's reasoning to be speculative in the interest of avoiding a potential appeal and moving this trial forward, I am inclined to grant he was cut off." "Your Honor, if I may," the voice was Karen Pierce's. She was standing again, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She had won. But winning wasn't enough. She needed to salt the earth. "I just wish to add one more thing for the record," she said, her gaze sweeping over Anaya with theatrical pity. This was it, the overreach, the fatal mistake, born of pure hubris. "It's not just a matter of implicit bias," Karen declared, her voice rising, projecting to the back of the room. "It is a matter of qualification. Look at her." She pointed a long, manicured finger directly at Anaya. The gesture was a physical blow. "This is a complex corporate liability case involving intricate financial documents and testimony from industry experts. People from that part of town, people who are between positions, simply do not have the intellectual capacity or the educational background to comprehend the evidence that will be presented." The courtroom fell into a stunned, tomb-like silence. Even the public defender was too shocked to object. Karen was not just arguing bias anymore. She was arguing for a class-based system of justice, where only the wealthy and educated were fit to serve. She was saying the quiet part out loud. "She is a threat to a fair trial," Karen concluded, her voice ringing with self-righteous conviction. "Because she is, with all due respect, fundamentally unqualified to even be in this room." She thought she was delivering the final, unanswerable blow. She thought she was putting a thug in her place. She was wrong. She had not delivered a blow. She had merely handed her executioner the sword. Judge Wallace's frown deepened. The unprofessionalism of the outburst was galling. He was a man of procedure, of decorum. This was a circus. He turned his weary eyes to Anaya, who had not moved a muscle during Karen's tirade.
Juror 17,
the judge said, his voice tight.
You have heard counsel's assessment. Do you have anything to say as to why you should not be dismissed for cause?
Anaya Sharma stood up. The movement was fluid, economical, and imbued with a sudden startling authority. The cheap blouse and simple trousers seemed to transform to become the unassuming uniform of a person so powerful they had no need for adornment.
Yes, Your Honor,
she said. Her voice was different. It was the same calm, quiet tone, but it now possessed a weight, a resonance that commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. The incessant hum of the lights seemed to fade. The air grew still. I do have something to say. Karen Pierce watched, a flicker of unease, finally piercing her thick hide of arrogance. The woman's calm was no longer just irritating. It was unnerving. It felt predatory. Mistress Pierce's motion and her subsequent commentary. Anaya began, the slight pause before commentary landing like a perfectly placed stiletto, is predicated on a series of false assumptions. She took a single step forward, out from behind the juror bench, a small but significant move that altered the geography of the room. She assumes my address implies poverty. She assumes my unemployment implies a lack of qualification. And she assumes my silence, in the face of her provocations, implies weakness. Anaya's eyes locked onto Karen's. She is wrong on all counts. With a slow, deliberate motion, Anaya reached down into her simple cloth tote bag. The entire courtroom held its breath, expecting, what? A weapon, a protest sign. Instead, her hand emerged with two objects. The first was a single, crisp document, folded into a neat rectangle. The second was a small, sleek digital audio recorder, its red record light blinking like a tiny, malevolent eye. The sight of it sent a jolt of pure, cold adrenaline through Karen's system. It shattered. In a split second, the predator became the prey, and she could feel the unseen jaws of a meticulously constructed trap beginning to close around her. "What is this?" Judge Wallace demanded, his voice sharp with impatience and a growing sense of dread. "Juror, what is the meaning of this?" Anaya did not look at the judge. Her gaze remained fixed on Karen Pierce, a surgeon's stare hinting a malignancy to the operating table. "Your Honor," Anaya said, her voice now carrying a charge of lethal precision. "Mistress Pierce has not just attempted to taint a jury pool. She has, while acting as a legal representative and officer of the court, committed multiple egregious violations of the Global Consolidated Holdings Corporate Code of Conduct and, quite possibly, federal law." Karen's face, which had been flushed with triumphant rage, began to pale. A sheen of cold sweat appeared on her brow. "Objection, this is absurd. She's a disgruntled juror creating a theatrical display." "A display?" Anaya's voice dropped, becoming terrifyingly quiet. "No, Mistress Pierce, this is a performance review." She turned her attention to the bench, extending the folded document. "Your Honor, my name is Anaya Sharma." The between positions statement was a truthful simplification. My last position was CEO of Sharma Analytics, a company I founded and later sold to a private equity firm for $9 billion. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. "My current position," she continued, her voice as flat and hard as a granite slab, "is majority shareholder and chairperson of the board of a number of companies, including the one Mistress Pierce purports to represent here today." She unfolded the document with a sharp snap. "This is a certified copy of the Corporate Ownership Registry for Global Consolidated Holdings. As you can see, My personal holding company, Sharma Capital, controls 57% of all voting shares. I am, for all intents and purposes, her boss. Silence. Karen Pierce looked as though she had been struck by lightning. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving a pasty gray mask of disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for water. "No," she whispered, the sound barely audible. "That's a lie. It's a trick." Judge Wallace, for the first time in his career, was speechless. He stared at the woman in the simple blouse, then at the sputtering, collapsing form of the high-powered lawyer. He waved his bailiff forward. "Bailiff, take that document, bring it here." The bailiff, a large man whose face was a mask of stunned confusion, did as he was told, carrying the paper to the bench as if it were a holy relic. Anaya wasn't finished. She held up the small digital recorder. Mistress Pierce is senior counsel. As such, she is bound by the GCH Code of Conduct, which she herself helped to redraft last fiscal year. I have it memorized. Article 4, Section 2B, prohibits any officer of the company from engaging in conduct that brings the corporation into public disrepute or demonstrates discriminatory animus, whether verbal or otherwise. Karen's own voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the dead air of the courtroom. The little brown girl in the cheap shoes was the worst of them, full of resentment. Anaya stopped the playback. "She made that statement in a public hallway, Your Honor, in reference to me, a prospective juror who is also, as it turns out, the principal owner of the company she represents. She then entered this courtroom and on the official record declared that a person's socioeconomic background and place of residence renders them intellectually unfit for civic duty." Anaya took a deliberate step closer to the defense table, her shadow falling over the now trembling Karen Pierce. "You did this while representing Global Consolidated Holdings," Anaya said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "A company whose public mission statement, which you yourself signed off on, loudly and proudly champions the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion." She paused, letting the hypocrisy hang in the air like a toxic cloud. "You were right about one thing, Mistress Pierce," Anaya said, her eyes boring into Karen's. "I am biased. As the owner of this company, I am profoundly and irrevocably biased against incompetent, prejudiced employees who open my corporation up to billions of dollars in potential liability and reputational damage with their reckless, hateful mouths." On the bench, Judge Wallace had finished examining the document. His face was a thundercloud. He looked at the court clerk who was frantically typing, her eyes wide. "Clerk, get on the terminal. Verify the ownership of Sharma Capital and its holdings in GCH. Now." A few frantic keystrokes later, the clerk's head snapped up. She gave the judge a single sharp nod. It was all true. The judge slammed his gavel down, the crack echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "Mistress Pierce," he roared, his voice shaking with a rage that seemed to shake the very walls. "In 30 years on this bench, I have never witnessed such a grotesque and unprofessional display of bigotry and arrogance." Karen flinched, as if he had physically struck her. "Your Honor, please." "You will be silent," the judge thundered. "You have attempted to corrupt the sacred process of jury selection. You have openly lied to this court about a juror's qualifications based on nothing but your own vile prejudice. You have brought shame upon your client, upon this court, and upon the entire legal profession." He took a deep, steadying breath, his gaze shifting to Anaya. The fury in his eyes was replaced by a look of profound, dawning respect. "Madam Chairperson," he said, the formal title a stark, brutal contrast to the earlier Juror 17. My sincerest apologies. You are, of course, dismissed from the jury pool for reasons that I believe we now all understand are entirely unique. He then turned his attention back to the defense table, his face hardening once more. As for you, Mr. S. Pierce, your presence in my courtroom is an insult to the very concept of justice. I am referring your conduct during these proceedings to the State Bar for an immediate investigation and emergency suspension of your license to practice law. He pointed a trembling finger toward the exit. Bailiff, escort Mistress Pierce from my courtroom. Her services in this case are terminated. Her presence here is no longer required or welcome. The bailiff approached Karen's side. She stood, but her legs seemed to have turned to rubber. The Armani suit, which had once seemed like a suit of armor, now hung on her like a shroud. Her face was a canvas of utter ruin. As the bailiff took her arm, she looked at Anaya one last time, her eyes pleading, horrified, uncomprehending. Anaya met her gaze with a look that was not triumphant, not angry, but simply final. It was the calm, dispassionate look of a system balancing its own books. Anaya delivered the final cutting line, her voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the room. You said I was out of my league, she murmured, echoing a taunt Karen had thrown at the public defender earlier. You were right. This was never your league to play in. The takedown was not just a courtroom drama. It became a corporate and media supernova. Before Karen Pierce had even reached the courthouse steps, her phone vibrating with a frantic call from the GCH General Counsel, the story was already leaking. A junior reporter in the back of the room, there to cover a boring corporate lawsuit, had live tweeted the entire exchange. The hashtags began to trend within the hour. Pound courtroom keg, Dawn, Kami, Zasha Holder. By the time Karen's chauffeured car pulled away from the curb, her career was already over. She just didn't know the full extent of it yet. The fallout was not merely professional. It was biblical in its totality. Anaya Sharma did not move with anger or vengeance, but with the cold, implacable efficiency of a market correction. Her first call, made from the same quiet alcove where she had spoken to David, was to the acting CEO of Global Consolidated Holdings. Fire her, Anaya said, her voice devoid of emotion. Issue a public press release within the hour. State that Karen Pierce has been terminated, effective immediately, for gross violations of the company's code of ethical conduct and for espousing views that are antithetical to the core values of GCH. Then I want you to personally call Mr. Miguel Vargas and his attorney, settle his claim. Give him 10 times what he asked for, issue a full public apology, and reinstate his full pension and benefits retroactive to his termination date. Is that clear? The CEO, a man who had never once spoken to the reclusive chairperson, could only stammer, "Yes, Madam Chairperson, absolutely." The press release hit the wire 47 minutes later. It was a corporate kill shot, a public denunciation so brutal and swift. The actions of Mistress Pierce do not represent our company, our values, or our people. The media frenzy was immediate and ferocious. Front-page headlines screamed from digital newsstands around the globe. 4B, the billionaire in the jury box. How Anaya Sharma executed the ultimate hostile takeover of her own lawyer. The Dal Street, J, or, Yo, or, GCH stock surges. The New York Post, your fired boss from hell gets schooled by real boss. For Karen Pierce, the world collapsed in stages. The State Bar, acting on Judge Wallace's blistering referral and the mountain of public evidence, summarily suspended her license to practice law pending a full disbarment hearing. A formality at this point. Her 20-year legal career had been annihilated in 20 minutes. Her husband, a prominent investment banker whose position relied heavily on social standing and a pristine reputation, saw the writing on the wall. He filed for divorce within a week, his lawyers citing the public humiliation and reputational damage her actions had caused his own business interests. The board of their exclusive country club called an emergency meeting and revoked her membership, citing a morals clause in their bylaws. The friends who had once clamored for invitations to her dinner parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Her name became a verb in corporate circles. To pull a Pierce was to self-destruct with such spectacular arrogance that it became a cautionary tale. Financially, the ruin was just as complete. Her severance was voided due to the for-cause termination. The stock options she had been counting on for her retirement vanished. With her primary source of income gone and facing staggering legal bills to fight the disbarment and the divorce, she was forced to sell her mansion in the Hamptons, then her penthouse apartment in the city. The ultimate irony, whispered among the legal community with a dark sense of poetic justice, was that she was forced to represent herself in the initial Bar Association proceedings. She, the woman who had declared a juror unfit, was now her own and only legal counsel. But Anaya's actions were not merely punitive, they were corrective. With the full weight of her authority as chairperson, she initiated a top-to-bottom review of global consolidated holdings. She didn't just fire Karen Pierce. She dismantled the culture that had created her. The entire legal department was restructured. Dozens of executives who had fostered or tolerated the win-at-all-costs mentality were quietly but firmly shown the door. The company's settlement and termination policies were completely rewritten, with a new emphasis on employee welfare and mediation over litigation. The case of Miguel Vargas became the new precedent. Anaya's final move was the most significant. She used her personal fortune and the GCH Corporate Foundation to establish a multi-million-dollar legal aid fund, specifically to help individuals bring wrongful termination and workplace discrimination lawsuits against major corporations. She was now funding the very weapons that could be used against her own company, a move that sent a terrifyingly clear message to her own executives. Stay honest, or you will be held accountable by me or by the system I am now empowering. Weeks after the courtroom explosion, the dust had begun to settle. The world saw Anaya Sharma as a corporate avenger, a folk hero for the digital age. But Anaya saw herself as a janitor. She was just cleaning up a mess. The final scene of the drama did not take place in a courtroom, but in a quiet, minimalist corner office that overlooked the sprawling city. The office was not opulent. There was no mahogany, no gaudy art. The walls were white. The furniture was functional steel and glass, and the only decoration was a single, perfect orchid on the corner of her desk. The real luxury was the view, a panoramic, God's-eye perspective of the metropolis she now so profoundly influenced. Anaya Sharma stood by the window, not in a power suit, but in the same style of simple, comfortable clothing she had worn to jury duty. Her power was not something she needed to wear. It was something she was. She was on the phone, her voice the same soft, controlled tone she had used to dismantle Karen Pierce's life. "Yes, David," she said, looking down at the endless stream of traffic. Each headlight, a life. The new protocols are in place. The fund is capitalized. David Chen's voice came through the phone speaker, still tinged with awe. "The board is in an uproar. They're terrified. They say you're building a weapon aimed at our own head." A small, rare smile touched Anaya's lips. "Good," she said. "Fear is a powerful motivator for good behavior. Tell them the law should be a shield for the powerless, not a sword for the powerful. She paused, her gaze finding the distant silhouette of the courthouse, a tiny block in the vast urban landscape. Tell them a title and a salary make you a servant of the company, not its king. Some people need to be reminded of that. It was the core of her philosophy, the lesson learned at her father's knee, now codified into corporate policy. "Understood, Madam Chairperson," David said, the formality returning to his voice. "Anaya," she corrected him gently. "Just Anaya." She hung up the phone and turned back to her desk. It was clean, except for the orchid and a single new manila folder placed squarely in the center. The tab on the folder read, "Sanders County Water Contamination. Prentice Chemical." It was another story of corporate malfeasance, another David versus an industrial Goliath, another system that needed correction. Anaya picked up the folder, her expression calm, her resolve absolute. She opened it and began to read. The fight for justice continued. What an incredible story. Anaya Sharma, the quiet professional, proved that true power isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about knowing the rules of the game better than anyone else, and having the patience to wait for your moment. Karen Pierce thought she was untouchable, a queen in her own courtroom, but karma came for her. Not in the form of a lightning bolt, but in a simple cloth tote bag and a voice that refused to be silenced. It just goes to show you should never, ever underestimate the person sitting across from you. If you loved watching this arrogant lawyer get exactly what she deserved, please smash that like button right now. It really helps the channel and lets me know you want more stories just like this one. And why keep all this satisfying karma to yourself? Share this video with anyone who loves a satisfying story of justice and revenge. Let them feel that moment when the tables turn so dramatically. Most importantly, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss out on our daily drama and revenge stories. We post new videos every single day, and you don't want to miss the next takedown. Finally, I have a question for you. Let me know in the comments below. What would you have done if you were in Anaya's shoes? Would you have sprung the trap in the courtroom? Or would you have done what her advisor suggested and just crushed the company from the outside? I can't wait to read your answers. See you in the next video.